Episode 15, Chapter 14, This Veil of Lies. Chapter 14, This Veil of Lies. The palace streets were empty, the night air cold and still. As the ivory spires towered high above, Luigi felt like he was passing through the fangs of some eldritch alien beast. The eerie silence wasn't pleasant, but the thought of it ending was even worse. The hero scanned the web of bridges overhead, searching for any sign of movement or flickering helmet light. There was an army waiting somewhere within these walls, and eventually it would make itself known. If this place was the maw of a monster, then it was due time for the jaws to snap shut. Luigi shifted nervously in his armor, the salvaged equipment doing very little to make him feel safe. His skills relied so much on agility, and this iron suit seemed to weigh a bit more with every step. If things backfired and it came to battle, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to fight or flee.
I just have to act natural, and they'll never suspect a thing.
Luigi took a calming breath, steadied himself, and signaled for the group to press on. Things would have been simpler with Bowser in front, free to smash and snarl like the living battering ram that he was. But such tactics would only expose them. In order for the plan to work, the Koopa King had to be in the middle, with a grey soldier to either side. Cammy was in the back with the second armor set, her feebleness playing into the role of an injured guard. Lady Bow was floating along invisibly somewhere, which left Luigi to take the leader's spot. Nothing about the position felt right.
Explain this plan to me again, Green Statch,
Bowser ordered, speaking again for the first time in a while. He hadn't been very happy about stepping back, but he had relented when Luigi promised him access to the Citadel's heart, and maybe even to the Empress herself.
Why did you dress up like those goons we thrashed, and how is it not a totally stupid idea?
Luigi sighed, hating that he was about to teach his arch-nemesis the oldest trick in the hero handbook.
If we pretend to be guards, then we can pass you off as a prisoner. If we meet anyone, then we'll tell them that we captured you outside the gates, and now we're taking you to the Empress.
He could practically feel Bowser's skeptical gaze boring into the back of his head.
Trust me, it'll work. I saw it in a movie once.
The huge Koopa was quiet for a moment while he processed the information, and then he began predictably stomping the pavement.
Graaheh. This is why I can never defeat you Mario chumps. It's because you don't play fair. What's the world coming to when a villain can't even trust their own henchmen?
Cammy was by his side as quickly as she could manage, her ill-fitting armor clattering as she tried to calm Bowser down.
Hush now, my lord. Remember your inside voice.
She turned back, casting her sight out over the grim skyline, as if searching for the one enemy who would be sure to see through the ruse.
Let's not forget, you've got a traitorous henchman of your own skulking about somewhere in this maze.
Bowser took a second to see that the reminder, baring his fangs and clenching his claws. Nobody had forgotten about Kamek, or the fact that he was probably up to something psychotic right about now. Eventually, the brute pulled himself together and fell back into line with an irritated grunt.
Yeah, whatever. Let's keep moving, and hope for his sake that he stays out of my way.
And so they made their way deeper into the palace, staying vigilant as the grid of streets led them ever inwards towards the center. But even after all this time, they still had yet to encounter a soul. Luigi peered into every doorway that they passed, finding empty barracks and abandoned warehouses, but never a single sign of life.
This is getting pretty bizarre. There's no way the soldiers were all outside in the city, so then where are they hiding?
As if in answer, an alarm began to blare in the far distance, drawing Luigi's attention to the one mighty tower that loomed above all the rest. A moment later, the ground beneath his feet pulsed with a sudden tremor, and a burst of energy could be seen rising through the spire's aura like a wave of violet heat. The klaxons soon faded and the quaking passed, but nothing could lessen the sense of pure evil that radiated from that half-melted monolith. A widening halo of purple stars swirled in the sky beyond. A dark inverse of the palace's spire rings, splaying out across the once empty sky. The alien lights twinkled in rhythmic sequence, one and then the next, as if responding to the tower's chilling call.
"I can't even tell how many there are,"
Luigi muttered, searching the swarm for some kind of pattern he could follow.
"It was bad enough with just one of those things up there, that night at the gala." "You're talking about that giant hunk of metal we found in Toad Town, aren't you?"
Cammy interjected, speaking of her own experience with the fallen star.
"You know, I'm still impressed with the efficiency of that spell crafting. Twice firing, time-delayed portal bomb. How the heck did an impatient lackwit like Kamek ever dream up a combo like that?"
The witch seemed poised to launch into full-blown magi babble, but luckily Bao appeared just in time to cut her off. Unfortunately, the news she brought with her wasn't the happy kind.
"Hush up, everyone,"
the ghost warned, indicating a shady alley halfway down the block.
"It's time to get serious, because there seems to be someone headed our way."
Sure enough, out from the shadows stepped a pair of patrolling guards, two enemies on some sinister mission of their own. They were turning to follow the sidewalk when the shape of Bowser caught their eye, and they paused to watch the intruders in a sort of quiet confusion.
"Turn back. This is a restricted area,"
one of them eventually called, sharing a cautious glance with the other, who merely shrugged. Their armor was badly dented, and Luigi noted that one of them seemed to be dragging a lame leg. He guessed that these guards were probably injured throwaways, unfit for whatever duty was keeping the others busy. It wouldn't be hard to beat them in a fight, but the sound of battle might summon reinforcements. In the end, the hero decided it was safest to stick with the plan.
"Well met, my fellow loyalists,"
he hailed back, trying and utterly failing to sound tough.
"As you can see, we've captured the leader of that Koopa invasion. You guys remember, the one that totally failed?"
Bowser let out a sharp growl, and Luigi tried to believe that it was part of the act.
"So if you'll just let us pass, we'll be on our way to the Empress. She's interested in, interrogating him herself."
The one-legged guard tilted their head quizzically, thought for a moment, and seemed prepared to speak until their partner interrupted.
"No, you can't go see her. I mean, she isn't feeling very well tonight."
He gestured off down the alley, back the way the two of them had come.
"You'll have to put your captive in the dungeons for now. If you'll just head that way for about 6 blocks, then—" "Are you kidding me?"
Bowser roared, getting caught up in the indignity even as he tried to play his role.
"Listen, I'm a royal prisoner, and I demand to be treated as such. If I can't get in to see the Empress, then at least take me to the cushy tower where you're keeping Princess Peach."
Luigi had to mentally groan at the last bit, because the Koopa's voice sounded almost hopeful. By this point, the silent guard had settled into a resigned slump as they waited to get a word in edgewise. When the time finally came, their voice sounded far too light and feminine for someone in such scary armor.
Guys? I think we had the same plan."
She was the first to remove her helmet, revealing a blessedly familiar purple face framed by cotton candy curls.
"Vivian, you're still alive!"
Luigi exclaimed with a grin, tearing off his own helmet to greet his missing friend.
"How did you get inside the palace before us, and why are you wearing my brother's hat?"
She looked sheepish, but before she could explain, he realized something about the other soldier, who by now was staring at him in soundless shock.
"Mario, is that you? I knew you would make it, bro."
Mario staggered forward, one shaky step and then another, until he was able to tackle Luigi into an awkward armored hug. The older twin kept his headgear on, likely to hide the undignified tears that were probably threatening to come. His voice shook behind the mask, but it was warm, filled with pure relief and a bit of curiosity.
How in the world did you get out of that one, Luigi? I saw you vanish, and thought I had lost you. I thought that I had failed you.
Lady Bow materialized over Mario's shoulder, rolling her eyes and giving the hero a light tap with her fan.
I know that I can be hard to see, but I didn't think I was easy to forget. I never left his side, no matter how much he whimpered.
She turned her attention to Vivian, who was quietly watching the brothers embrace with a teary-eyed smile of her own.
You did well too, my dear, but you smell terrible. When we get home, I'm taking you to the most lavish spa in Poshley Heights, my treat.
Throughout it all, Bowser and Cammy had been whispering amongst themselves in the background, but now the Scaly King was stomping over to say his piece.
So you're alive, Mario?
He sure didn't sound ecstatic, but he made no move to argue, and with a curt nod, he simply pushed past to continue down the street.
Very good. If that dumb light had managed to put you down, it would have been seriously unsatisfying. You're with us now, but stay in the back and try not to interfere with my genius prisoner plan.
Mario finally lifted his helmet a bit, if only to give Luigi a bemused little grin.
We usually have to beat each other up before this part. I wonder what's put him in such a good mood.
The group resumed their stealthy journey, with Mario and Vivian taking up spots to Bowser's left and right. Luigi might have imagined it, but his brother and the siren looked a bit saddened by suddenly walking so far apart. There were 6 of them now, a few tired souls against all the madness of this bleak and broken world. The distant spire pulsed once more, a rippling energy that echoed like laughter, as if to mock these little heroes who just didn't belong. High above them all, the violet stars burned with hidden purpose, and waited. Several miles away, in the grassy fields beyond the river, Yoshi the dinosaur was in a very tight spot. That was a literal statement, by the way. He was currently wedged halfway through the airfield's chain-link fence, in a very narrow gap that Goombella had found. She had been petite enough to simply sidle through, and the toad's mushroom caps were just squishy enough to squeeze inside. But Yoshi was having a harder time, since he was larger and not made of fungus stuff. While he struggled in the background, the others were getting the lay of the land. In this corner of the base, a small cluster of sheds and storehouses kept the intruders hidden from patrolling guards, whose helmet lights could be seen flickering from all the way across the field. Hangars lined one side of the compound, and a darkened control tower overlooked everything from the far end. But what really mattered were the runways, and the endless rows of saucers and cruisers that waited there, idling and ready for liftoff. Every minute or two, sirens would blare out across the field, and another section of the fleet would take to the sky. The saucers went up in squadrons of 5 or 6, always wobbling unsteadily at first, never gaining speed until they had maneuvered high up into the open air. The larger ships took off alone, and far less often than the tiny one-pilot saucers, but when they did, the roar of their engines could rattle the fences from several hundred yards away.
There sure are a lot of them,
Toad whispered, ducking into some leafy bushes as a few ships zipped by overhead, flying in a lopsided honeycomb formation. There couldn't be more than a few hundred out there in all, but from this limited vantage, the passing craft just never seemed to end.
I guess we're going to the control tower, but how can we get there?
By now, Yoshi had made it past the trials of the fence, and was now trotting over to join the others in their hiding spot.
Stealth is the most sensible option,
he suggested, peeking into a nearby shed to see if there were any convenient items stashed inside. Finding nothing but gardening tools and a rusty lawnmower, he settled into the bushes beside Goombella.
If we lure a few guards over this way, we can steal their armor and slip past the others unseen. Seriously, dude?
The Goomba girl interrupted, shooting him an incredulous glare.
First of all, that trick is starting to get super stale, and secondly, how would that even work for me? I don't exactly have the body type to pull it off.
Yoshi opened his mouth to object, but she hopped closer in a pointed effort to silence him.
And don't even tell me to be the prisoner, because you totally know there's no dungeon here.
In the end, the team decided to just make a break for it and hope for the best. To be honest, Yoshi had been expecting that since the start, because his friends always defaulted to that type of strategy.
It doesn't help that I'm the only one here who really knows how to fight. If the guards see us, it's up to me to keep the group safe.
The dinosaur was used to playing support on his adventures with Mario, so this new role was both exciting and a little daunting.
I've been wondering something,
Toadette piped up as the group slid down a little embankment at the edge of the first runway.
What's the point in fixing all these old troop ships, anyway? If the Empress wants a fleet, then why not build a fresh one?
It was a fair point, considering the sad state these saucers had probably been in.
It's gotta be, like, a symbolic validation sort of thing,
Goombella guessed with a shrug, looking up at a silver-bellied frigate as they snuck between the landing gear.
It's the same reason she lives in the old mothership, I bet. What could make her feel more powerful than controlling the very same ships that nearly conquered the world?
Yoshi gave her a thoughtful glance, having not expected such a profound statement from her.
If she built her own fleet, then a part of her would always be stuck wondering, yeah, but could it beat the Shroobs?
They passed from aisle to aisle, hurrying when they could, but keeping to the shadows when there were guards about. Luckily, the soldiers didn't seem to be patrolling so much as inspecting, pausing every now and then to examine a ship just before it took off. Once, Yoshi managed to slurp one up and make an egg, although he hoped he didn't have to use it. It was easy to see why the vessels were so interesting, besides the obvious fact that they were actual starships. Each of them was covered from fore to aft in runic markings, swirls of arcane squiggles that had been drawn in the same painstaking patterns across each and every hull. Nobody in the party knew what the symbols meant, or even what language they were in, but they were unlikely to be there for visual effect alone.
This whole situation just keeps getting creepier,
Yoshi mused, not liking the idea of enchanted warships one bit. A while later, he glanced back to find Goombella and Toadette following safely behind him. And Toad about 30 feet away, prancing up the docking ramp of a shuttle parked across the aisle.
What are you doing?
The dinosaur whispered frantically, looking both ways before hurrying over to set things right. He tried to snare the little shroom with his tongue, but Toad seemed to be expecting it and hopped out of the way.
This isn't a game. Get down from there before you're seen.
Toad shook his head and pressed further into the craft, distractedly talking back over his shoulder as he went.
Relax, it's empty in here. I just want to see what these things look like up close.
Yoshi could hear him rummaging around inside, opening cabinets and swiveling the pilot's seat.
Hey, even the inside has those weird squiggles. They're all over the windows, too. How is anybody supposed to fly this thing?
Yoshi could only groan inwardly as he hoisted himself up and went in after the little scamp. It was a pretty cramped shuttle, big enough for maybe 3 or 4 passengers, and of course Toad was right at the front, sitting in the chair and making engine noises with his mouth. Goombella and Toadette soon climbed in to join them, mildly curious and wanting the group to stick together. Between the 3 of them, it was surely an easy task to grab Toad and get back to the mission. Or at least it would have been, had their clambering not attracted the attention of an enemy patrol.
Trespassers! Exit the ship and explain yourselves!
Yelled a voice from behind, and Yoshi turned to find a lone spearman charging up the ramp, ready for battle and clearly not interested in hearing excuses. Yoshi reflexively reached back to grab his egg, took aim, and threw with all his might. And then the door slammed shut, splattering the projectile messily against them and the surrounding walls. The soldier was pounding on the other side, but he was suddenly drowned out as the engines flared to life. The docking ramp fell away, and the lone guard with it, as the ship jolted into the air. Yoshi turned, absolutely horrified, to the mushroom in the pilot's seat.
"Toad, don't tell me that you..."
The little guy held up his hands defensively, showing that they had been nowhere near the controls.
"It wasn't me, I swear. It had to have been Goombella."
The girl squinted at him in offense, standing on tiptoes as if to say that she couldn't even reach most of the dials. Toadette had been in the back of the ship, and Yoshi knew for sure that it hadn't been him. So, then, who, or how? It didn't seem to matter, because they were swiftly leaving the airfield behind, and none of them had the know-how to turn their ride around. Yoshi looked out a rune-covered window to try and find the ground, but it was already far enough away to be lost in darkness. There were several saucers ascending with them, a few to either side, and the dinosaur could see from here that they were empty.
"This is bad,"
he thought, scrambling up to see the view from the main screen, pushing Toad aside as he took the chair for himself. As he feared, they seemed to be on a straight course for the sinister field of stars in orbit above the palace.
"The invasion fleet, and it looks like we're a part of it now."
The engines hummed louder, and the little craft picked up speed. Soon enough, a spot was offered in the nearest ring, and Yoshi and the others were swept away into the cosmic dance. The Citadel's heart drew nearer with every step, but what would they find when they got there? Rarely had Mario ventured into a villain's lair so utterly blind. If this were a typical sort of adventure, there would be enemies around each corner and traps along every path. He would probably be battered and weary from fighting, moving forward on faith and the last fumes of adrenaline. Times like that weren't exactly fun, but they were normal for the end of the world. This place, though, had been stark and barren since he had left that dungeon cell, and he wasn't quite sure how to interpret that. He still felt very tired, but this was the emotional kind of exhaustion. Since entering the palace, Mario had been betrayed, lost a brother, found him again, been offered love, and maybe even started to feel it back. He had run the whole gamut of feelings from grief to bliss, and it had only been an hour or two.
"I've never believed in comfort food, but when we get out of here, I'm gonna need the biggest plate of linguine the world has ever seen."
While he gathered his thoughts, the others were beginning to chat amongst themselves. A few of them had never spoken before, but they couldn't afford to be strangers if they were going to work as a team. Cammy had interjected herself into a conversation between Luigi and Bao, and she seemed to have turned it into a lecture, because they both looked bored out of their wits.
"What are you supposed to be?"
Bowser inquired, glancing aside to give Vivian the once-over.
"Some kind of grape jelly ghost."
He had evidently forgotten the time they had briefly met before, back down in the Palace of Shadow.
"I'm not actually a ghost, even though everybody asks that,"
the siren answered, trying her best not to stammer or shy away from the imposing reptile.
"I'm not really sure why, though. My powers aren't that similar, and ghosts tend to be pretty pale. Is it because I live near creepy steeple? But there's no way you could have known that, so..."
By now, she had realized that Bowser was no longer listening, and let herself trail off with a nervous sigh. If the Koopa's hulking form hadn't been directly between them, Mario would have reached over to give her hand a gentle squeeze. He was still trying to pin down what he felt for Vivian, and now wasn't the time to be getting lost in such thoughts, but no matter what, he needed to keep her safe. She was his reason for fighting now, and that was a choice he was proud to have made. All around them, the ambient light was beginning to change, soft white fading to a deep and devouring shade of magenta. The tower that had once been so distant now loomed across just one last plaza, surrounded at the base by what looked to be the darkened husk of a stadium. The tremors were growing larger and more frequent, and Mario noticed plumes of noxious smoke billowing up from vents around the plaza's edge. Even as they passed beneath the shadow of the structure, as they entered the stadium through a grand archway, traveling through rooms clearly meant for royalty, they met no resistance at all. After a few twists and turns, the party found itself in a wide passage that might have glowed golden if the lights had been left on. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead in rows, but not a single lamp was burning, leaving the hallway and all its gilded carvings submerged in near-pitch darkness.
For a tyrant, she doesn't have bad taste in interior design,
Bao commented as she surveyed the room, pausing to inspect a gold leaf etching of 7 stars around a mountaintop.
It's opulent, yet perfectly cold and dreary. Very beau chic.
At the far end of the hall, an immense doorway had been left slightly ajar. The narrow gap cast a thin sliver of blue-violet light down the corridor, and by the strangeness of magic, the glow seemed far darker than the true shadow to either side. For a moment, the group hid in that bright darkness as they paused before the door, listening to what sounded like the labored breathing of some ailing monster in the room beyond. In the end, it was Bowser who first grew tired of waiting, and he shoved the door wide open to usher the others inside. This would usually be the part where they found the enemy's palatial throne room, but Mario had learned to stop expecting the ordinary. What he stumbled into instead was the wreckage of a dining hall in the wake of a magical hurricane. Great wooden tables had been carelessly flung aside, piled against the outer walls and splattered with the sad remains of some forgotten feast. At the chamber's center, a great hole had been burned through the once plush carpet, creating a canvas for the ritual inscribed on the stone beneath. The runes seemed to be seared into the floor itself, a web of symbols, each shining with that stifling violet anti-light. The outermost ring was lined with burning candles on tall silver stands, their smoke rising in perfect streams like the bars of some ethereal cage. Try as they might, the heroes couldn't progress more than a few feet into the room. Somehow, unnaturally, they were being repelled.
This is the darkest kind of magic,
Cammy explained,
made from pure Zetar power. Kamek likely corrupted one of the stars you brought here with you, my lord.
Bowser gave an exasperated snort as the witch tried poking at the anomaly with her wand. It seemed totally unaffected, so she soon gave up.
It's designed to push away living souls, so it's often used to create pathways for body transference spells.
At the sound of her voice, a certain dark shape began to stir. The last notable feature of this grim scene, and one that hadn't escaped anybody's notice. At the center of the ritual, a great mass of flesh and frails lifted her head, her shadowed eyes seeming to glow red in the light of the runes.
The feast is long over, but it seems I still have guests. How did you enjoy the festival, little ones?
And there she was. Awakening before them was Empress Toadstool herself, struggling to sit up as she floundered in her enormity. Sweat-matted blonde hair fell across her face in fraying ringlets, and her breaths came in ragged gasps as she seemed to grow paler by the second.
I don't look very regal right now, and I apologize. It's quite exhausting, you know, getting the life sucked out of you.
She panted, reaching absent-mindedly for a wine glass that wasn't there. Nobody knew quite what to say, here in the presence of such an overwhelming woman. Mario had heard rumors about her size, whispered by strangers in the taverns of Rogueport, but he hadn't quite taken them seriously until now. He could see the echo of Peach in her eyes, but only for an instant, before they were lost again within that fiery haze. Somehow, the transition unsettled him in a way that he couldn't describe. The silence reigned for just a moment longer, filling the chamber like a tense fog. and then Bowser burst out laughing.
Gwa ha 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 ha!
The king guffawed, nearly doubling over as he pointed across the room with a shaking claw.
Are you serious? I mean, how many gourmet guys did you eat this morning? You're a stinkin' blob!
The ladies in the party were giving him the side eye, but Bowser just couldn't help himself.
I thought I was prepared for this, but you're just too much.
The Empress didn't look amused in the slightest, but she kept her voice silky and patient.
This body has been a prison to me for many years,
she began, lifting as much of herself as she could grasp with her ever-weakening grip.
It's one that has become more confining as it's grown larger, but I'm about to leave it all behind for good. In just a few short minutes, I'll be reborn and beautiful.
Luigi was the next to speak, his interest piqued by this latest mention of rebirth.
You keep using that term, but why? I remember it from your festival invitation, and it was strange then, too.
He asked the next part very carefully, as if expecting that he wouldn't like the answer.
How exactly are you being reborn?
She tried to chuckle at his naivete, but it came out sounding more like a hollow wheeze. As the spell continued to sap away at her strength, her face seemed somehow bloated and skeletal at the very same time.
Oh my, you're very far behind, aren't you? I'm talking about your pretty pink princess, of course. I'm taking her body for myself. Why else do you think I've been keeping her here?
Vivian let out a horrified gasp, the familiarity of the situation not lost on her at all. But it was Bowser who truly reacted, his laughter forgotten as he exploded into a rage.
You're doing what with my peach?
He thundered, trying to charge across the room but going nowhere fast as the spell held him back.
Where is she? Is she here in this room? Are you sitting on her, you sicko?
The Empress didn't appear worried, but she kept her eyes steadily fixed on the furious king.
You remind me of someone, you know. Someone that I hate.
She sagged forward, letting the charred remains of her right arm fall limply into the candlelight.
I've been living with what he did for 20 years. If you want an explanation for my appearance, then here it is. Why take care of a body that was ruined from the start?
She sank back into the shadows, sighing as she returned to the point.
The little princess is at the top of this tower. Or should I call it my new battleship?
She said it easily, knowing that the heroes had no chance to climb the skyscraper in time.
As soon as the transfer is complete, I'll simply walk to the ship's bridge in my new body. The fleet is already in position up there, so all that's left to do is start the engines and join them.
Bowser was back out the door in a flash, not even waiting for the monologue to end before charging full tilt into the darkness. He had practically dragged Cammy with him, and the old hag's startled shouts could still be heard vanishing into the distance.
He's quite a lumbering oaf, isn't he?
The Empress laughed, even weaker than the time before.
I'll obviously beat him up there, but maybe I'll wait around for him, just to see the look on his face.
Mario glanced between the enemy and the hallway, quickly deciding whether to follow or stay behind.
Bowser shouldn't have done that, but we can't afford to get separated now,
he reasoned, motioning to the others as he made a dash for the door.
It's not like we can do anything here, either. We can't even reach the Empress with that spell in the way.
Suddenly, threads of black shadow burst from every side of the doorframe, weaving and interlocking with grasping tendrils until the passage was webbed shut. Mario skidded to a halt mere inches from the barrier, and the room echoed with lifeless laughter as Luigi and Vivian nearly bowled him over from behind.
Oh, wow! Now you guys are really somewhere you shouldn't be.
He felt her presence before he saw her. A lithe shape swimming beneath the ground, rippling through the shadows in playful swirls.
You just can't leave us alone, can you?
She asked icily, finally emerging from the abyss with a manic glare smeared across her face. The false siren glided in close, circling the foursome but keeping her predatory gaze fixed on Vivian alone.
Why did you have to survive? I was never supposed to see you again.
A very pointed cough made everyone turn back towards the Empress, who was regarding the new arrival with an expectant arch of her eyebrow.
Oh, right. I'm sorry to intrude, Your Grace.
The impostor said with something like a sloppy curtsy, seeming less sure of herself now that all eyes were on her.
Master Kamek is coming, too. I'm here first, since I'm so much faster than he is.
Meanwhile, poor Luigi was still playing catch-up, watching the two Vivians with a look of total befuddlement. Finally, he leaned forward and tried to slyly tap Mario on the shoulder.
Hey bro, why aren't we freaking out about the new shadow siren? Or the fact that she looks just like our friend? Or how her hair is all torn out and tangled, just like...
That's when he put the pieces together, sliding back with a little twitch of his mustache.
She was with us that whole time, wasn't she?
Mario nodded, but the thorough explanation would have to wait, because that's when Kamek chose to make his entrance. The little wizard warped into existence up near the ceiling of the hall, hovering on his broom as he examined the ritual from above.
Everything is linked, and the princess is on the other altar,
he called down, as simply as if he were reporting on the tower's plumbing.
It shouldn't be much longer, Your Grace. You'll start getting some motion sickness, and then maybe some, severe flesh-tearing sensations. But that's normal.
This was a nightmare scenario. All three bad guys were here in the same room, and the heroes were trapped between them. Mario didn't like it one bit, and Kamek must have sensed his unease, because that's when he noticed the party for the first time. He visibly grimaced, gesturing at Mario and Vivian as he locked eyes with the siren's double.
You put them in the same cell.
The fake Vivian threw up her hands in defense of her actions, not looking guilty in the slightest.
Yeah, but I thought it would be funny. They would try so hard to save each other. They'd keep failing, and finally they'd die in each other's arms. You know, comedy.
Kamek looked less than impressed, sighing and pinching the bridge of his beak with a claw.
You put them in the same cell,
he repeated, emphasizing the words like he was speaking to a child.
The special cell, with the barrier I learned to make by studying the tribe of darkness. Tell me again, Shadow, what's important to remember about that tribe's magic?
The siren rolled her eyes and groaned, as if she were being made to recite homework in front of a class.
The dark tribe's magic is fueled by chaos, the antithesis of which is purity, which is created by love.
She was beginning to see what she had done wrong, and it was only making her more distressed as she glared daggers at the real Vivian.
The stronger the spell, the truer the love necessary to undo it.
Luigi nodded sagely, having learned all there was to know about chaos magic a few years back, during a certain nasty fusion experience with a master of the craft.
That's true, but your spell must have been pretty pathetic if two totally platonic friends could break it.
Mario and Vivian shared a glance and a blush. Luigi had missed the message, but they'd have to tell him eventually. Suddenly, a psychic force took hold of the enemy Vivian, and her tail began stretching thin as Kamek lifted her up to meet his eyes.
How can I trust you as my assistant if you keep making the same basic errors? As your punishment?
He started, and Mario noticed how both sirens tensed involuntarily at the word.
I'm going to leave you here to deal with these interlopers by yourself. Try not to ruin it this time, you utter screw-up.
He let her go, and she was sent recoiling into the stone floor with a startled whimper. The wizard raised his wand as if to warp away, but paused one last time to address the heroes.
You know, that armor really doesn't suit any of you. I'll get rid of it, and say that I'm doing you a fashion favor."
With a final cackle and a sweep of his scepter, the mage whirled into subspace and made his exit. Mario suddenly felt a bit chillier, and nearly 100 pounds lighter. He looked down to find his iron suit missing. He was back in his usual overalls, as was Luigi beside him. Vivian had yet again been stripped of everything except Mario's hat, which she meekly pulled a little bit tighter.
"This isn't really a bad thing,"
he reminded himself, wondering if Kamek even realized the benefits of his little curse.
"I could never have fought in that heavy stuff, anyway."
Just then, the sounds of nausea reminded everyone of the elephantine figure in the room.
"All I gathered from that,"
the Empress weakly moaned,
"is that the spell should have taken me by now. But I'm still here."
She was so pale that veins were becoming visible beneath her skin, and even her blonde locks were starting to lose their luster.
"I'm certainly feeling sick, but that's mainly from listening to you all prattle on about love. As if you even know what the word means."
Mario had heard about as much as he could stand, and finally felt the need to speak his mind.
"And what do you know about love, exactly? You certainly don't feel it for anyone but yourself."
He knew from experience that love wasn't easy for Peach Toadstool, but this version's issues were on a whole other level.
"At least the Peach I know cares about her subjects, but you just slaughtered yours. You have no right to act superior, not after what I saw out there."
He was prepared for snappy retorts or sugar-coated threats, but instead, the Empress seemed genuinely sad.
"That's exactly what happened. I led my loyal subjects straight into a slaughter, but I'm about to avenge them all."
She shook her head and closed her eyes, shutting out the harshness of reality.
"I bear you no ill will, at least not yet. If you turn around right now, I'll permit you to leave, and you can live freely in this world once I've left it behind."
It was Vivian's turn to reach out, this time with sympathy rather than hard accusations.
"Please, don't do this. If you go, there's just going to be more pain and loss, isn't there? I know that you've suffered, but that's no reason to hurt others. But it's not too late for you to,
She was silenced by her other self, who had spawned a shadowy hand to cover the siren's mouth. That managed to leave the Empress shaken, but not in the way Vivian would have hoped.
"Don't you dare speak to me of pain,"
the woman hissed, her whole form trembling as she relived the worst night of her life.
"You can't imagine what it was like on that mountainside, watching through the storm as my entire world fell apart."
She lurched forward, bringing her corpse-white face fully into the light.
"Every one of them died that night, except me. Nobody understands loss like I do."
Lady Bao had been silent thus far, preferring to soak up the situation like she usually did. But after this latest outburst, even she had finally had enough. Since she wasn't a living soul, she had no problem crossing the room to give the Empress a much-needed thrashing.
"I get it, life is hard. Bad things happen to good people. But you need to stop being such a baby."
The ghost punctuated each word with a mighty slap, putting in enough force to leave the Empress utterly whiplashed and stunned. By the end of it, the woman's head merely fell forward to rest limply against the mountain of her body, her plump face hidden behind bangs that had faded to the color of wilting grass. Nobody moved an inch as the seconds ticked by, and in that crushing silence, it became clear that she was no longer breathing.
"Is she,
Vivian attempted, maneuvering away from her duplicate as she tried to get a better view. Across the hall, Bao was looking a bit less livid as the uncertainty crept in. She drew out her fan again, this time to poke against the Empress' cheek, searching for signs of life. And was instantly blasted back and out of sight by a pulse of magic so powerful that it shattered the rear windows, and Mario briefly wondered if the tower was coming down. When the hero regained his footing, he saw that the Empress had been yanked into the air by an invisible force, held in place with her limbs twisted back, like some kind of overstuffed ragdoll. Her eyes were wide and empty, her mouth hung agape, and something inside her was screaming. But these were not the screams of a living woman, no matter how much agony she might be in. No, these were unearthly and haunting wails, like those of an evil spirit during their first taste of eternal torment. Her bloated body seemed to be collapsing inward, the pale flesh crumpling as if consumed by some hungry vortex where her heart had been. Then, with one final spine-severing aerial twist, she collapsed back to the floor with a deafening whoomph. But something remained behind. Suspended in space above the unmoving Empress was a slender wisp of pink starlight. The wraith ascended by an inch or two, timidly, almost girlishly, risking a little pirouette as it rose. It extended the starry shape of an arm, the right one, and seemed to examine it for a moment in wonder.
"That's her soul,"
Mario realized with an icy splash of sudden terror.
"Her soul is free, and the spell is actually working."
Guided by a pathway that only it could see, the little soul kept rising with its spectral arm outstretched. But it had barely traveled the length of itself when something absolutely terrifying happened. The Empress' body gave another sickening heave, and something else erupted out of it into the night. In half an instant, the dining hall was lost in the shadow of a violet plume, a writhing storm that crackled with red lightning, and echoed with the guttural roars of a distant memory. The nightmare thing swirled itself into tendrils that lashed at the boundaries of its magic cage, pulling itself higher in a single-minded frenzy. The tiny soul was lost in mere seconds, ensnared by the tendrils and devoured back into the heart of the storm. The little thing scarcely had time to flicker in panic before it was gone again, perhaps forever. The plume paid no attention to anyone else, never pausing as it surged up and through the ceiling in its desperate climb towards freedom, towards the top of the spire, the other altar, and the waiting body of Princess Peach. Mario ran to the shattered window and looked skyward, watching as the violet energy storm clawed its way through the tower to claim the woman he had once loved.
"It's too late,"
he thought, wondering if there had ever really been a way to prevent this outcome.
"Kamek, what have you done?"
If there was one thing that Bowser could truly call his area of expertise, it was how to design a royally epic final dungeon. It was a niche skill, but it certainly came in handy at a time like this. The interior of the stadium had been a labyrinth of corridors surrounding that central feasting hall. Many of them had been dingy and narrow, clearly meant for servants to skulk about without being seen. Bowser had immediately known to ignore those hallways. There had to be a lift somewhere that was big enough for the Empress, which meant he only needed to check the passages that were wide enough for her to actually traverse. If Mario had been the one exploring this place, he would have surely spent hours wandering around, solving inane puzzles to gather keys or whatever. Bowser had the advantage of beefiness, so locked doors were never an issue.
"Yeah, I might have been in trouble if this place had ladders or platforms, but what were the chances of that?"
He was in the home of a woman who obviously couldn't even handle the stairs. In the end, it had taken him less than 10 minutes to find what he was searching for: an immense but empty circular room with walls of pure glass. At first, Bowser had thought it was some kind of artsy patio, until Cammy had found the control console, and noticed the sides of the tube stretching away into the sky.
"It's all one massive elevator. You've led us straight to it, my lord."
Now, as the lift ascended, Bowser was trying to survey the devastation out beyond the palace walls. He remembered how the city skyline had looked just a few hours back, when he had seen it from the riverside with his loyal troops. But now, both the city and the army were gone, and Princess Peach would soon be next. The king clenched his fists, appalled by that very thought. No, he wasn't losing anything else tonight. Every now and then, the lift would whoosh past other departure points on its way to the top. Boarding docks and loading bays which offered brief glimpses into the spire itself. The scenery was passing by too quickly to study, but every surface seemed to be covered in the same garishly magenta neon lines. To break the monotony, glowing golden veins snaked their way throughout the ship, pumping stolen starlight down from the reactor above. But there was something far more important that caught Bowser's eye. The legions of grey soldiers that stood ready and waiting on every deck of the colossal craft. There were armed spearmen inside each bay and behind every window, plus a few workers making last-minute repairs as they waited for the invasion to begin.
So this is where they've been hiding,
the Koopa thought, realizing that it was pretty obvious in hindsight.
Duh, where else would they be? This thing is about to take off.
Then, out of absolutely nowhere, the silence of the night was blown apart by the deafening chaos of thunder and splitting stone. The spire gave such a mighty lurch that Bowser was sure that he had missed his chance, that the launch was already underway. But when he trundled over to the glass and looked down, he didn't see the spreading blaze of a liftoff, only a dark cloud rising from where the dining hall should have been. His first instinct was to blame Mario, because who else would go around blowing up perfectly good castles? Then the mass was bursting free of the rooftop, striking at the air with crimson lightning as it twisted tendrils impossibly out of itself, unfurling from within like a ghostly fractal helix. The thing whipped itself around blindly, trying to find the path set for it by Kamek's dark magic. It didn't take long, and soon the storm was barreling its way up and around the tower like a runaway train on a spiral. For a moment, it passed out of view beneath the lift as its path took it straight through the tube itself, and Bowser felt the whole structure tremble as ethereal roars reverberated through the glass.
"Can't you make this thing go any faster?"
The Koopa shouted over to Cammy, who had torn her eyes away from the console to watch the soul thing's ascent.
"No matter what weird demon form she's in, there's no way I'm gonna let Auntie Peach beat me."
The witch turned her eyes back to the panel, scanning the buttons and dials with a look of increasing helplessness.
"I'm sorry, Your Urgentness, but there's only one speed setting on this wretched machine. This is as fast as it's meant to go."
Somewhere down below, the storm's intangible trail had led it back around again, and this time it was close enough to send hairline cracks exploding up across the glass.
"I didn't ask what it's supposed to do, you impertinent hag. Just make it go faster."
Cammy had a distinct "this is a bad idea" look in her eyes, which told Bowser everything he needed to know.
"You have a spell, don't you? Well then, I order you to use it. Pretend you're an Electro Koopa on a carnival ride, and really kick this thing into high gear."
On the one hand, she followed his command without question. On the other, she had given him literally no warning. And Bowser was slammed into the floor so suddenly that he shot back into his shell on pure reflex. He clawed his way back out, battling G-forces with every twitch, to see the spire falling past at ludicrous speed. The raging wails of the spirit, or whatever it was, were growing fainter by the second. Overhead, the Stardust reactor was a blur of golden light, and it was rapidly filling up the sky. There was some kind of melted balcony stretching off to the side, and the far end was shining with that same freaky glowing darkness from the ritual downstairs. The lift began to slow, but not quite soon enough, and soon Bowser was half charging, half launching his way off the platform, and into whatever sick situation he had come up here to wreck. There she was, pretty and pink and perfect. After so much suffering and embarrassment, the Koopa King had finally made it to his princess. Peach was lying on a marble slab not even 50 feet away, bound by threads of rippling blue magic. She didn't seem to notice him at first. her eyes were on the hunched form of Kamek, who was slithering around and chanting the usual magic nonsense that Bowser had begun to hate. A thunderclap echoed up from below as the plume finished another loop in the spiral, and the beastly reptile began his blazing stampede down the balcony. Kamek heard his heavy footfalls from far away, spinning around wide-eyed and horrified.
How did you get up here?"
the wizard shrieked, firing off a couple of haphazard magic blasts. The first missed Bowser by a mile, and the second struck him right in the chest, but the sturdy Koopa tanked the hit and kept right on running. Kamek evidently didn't learn anything, because he took a step back and shot a third projectile at the oncoming king. Bowser hadn't even felt the last one, so he let this new one hit him as well, and immediately knew that something was wrong. He saw the scenery blur, felt his insides twist in on themselves until he thought they might snap. And then he was somewhere else, warped halfway across the balcony and out of the way.
It was another trick? Gah, am I the only one around here who fights fair?
Unfortunately, in that moment of rage, he had neglected to slow down or change course. The next thing Bowser knew, his momentum had sent him blasting over the railing and into empty air. Time ground itself to a standstill. Peach was watching the scene in utter shock, and Kamek's face was slowly curling into the most punchable little smirk. But Bowser's eye was on Cammy, who had snuck into view with two readied blasts of her own. In the same instant, she fired one at Kamek and the other at her king. The wizard only saw the one meant for him, dodging to the side as the other zipped straight past.
A distraction,
Bowser thought as the second spell hit its mark.
Well played, you crusty old genius.
The nausea and the twisting pain came again, reality blinked away. And then he was standing where he needed to be, right behind Kamek. The little mage barely had time to turn his head before a side swipe threw him off his feet, followed by a gruesome punch that sent him careening across the terrace, tumbling like a stone into the wall beneath the reactor's sphere.
Take that, you clod,
Bowser thought with a grin, watching as the wizard flopped limply over onto his face.
I've wanted to do that for almost 30 years.
Very far away, across the infinite divide of space and time, another version of Kamek was settling into bed with some warm milk and a bit of light reading. It was a beautiful evening, especially with the castle all to himself. Suddenly, he was overcome with the strangest feeling that he was about to get fired. Bowser wasted no time in getting the princess off of that creepy pedestal. After all, the rampaging soul was nearly upon them. Peach's face was completely unreadable, but inside she had to be bursting with gratitude.
Bowser, what in the world are you doing here?
She asked sharply, trying to pull her wrist out of his grip.
Did you come all this way just to kidnap me again?
Okay, so maybe she was still in shock, and the gratitude would come later.
I'm here to rescue you,
the king corrected, even though he rarely saw the distinction.
Did you see what that clown was about to do to you just now? Mario didn't even bother coming upstairs. He's still down there with his brother and that jelly girl. I'll bet they're not even. Wait, Mario and Luigi are here.
She breathed, suddenly redoubling her efforts to pull away.
They came for me after all? Please, let me go, I have to get down there. I need to.
Bowser held on tighter, letting out a rumbling sigh. Typical flighty Peach, always trying to leave in the middle of a tender moment.
What do you care if that guy is here?
He questioned, trying to cross his arms with one free hand, but realizing that it didn't quite work.
Didn't you dump him? I'm the one who came here to save you. Where's my special rescue kiss?
Sadly, before she could lean up to totally give him a smooch, the crisis finally caught up with them. The squall of purple energy crashed up over the balcony like a tidal wave breaking against a cliffside, looming as a colossus even as it scattered into a spray. Hundreds of searching tendrils weaved into the ritual circle, and the main mass echoed with a half-panicked gurgle as it found nobody there. The storm's heart surged crimson in sudden terror, the thing forcing more of itself up and over the railing in one last, blind scramble to find the host it had been promised. Bowser held Peach behind himself, backing away as he let this abomination swirl itself to pieces. The energy storm was beyond violent now, striking at the empty pedestal with red lightning as it seemed to suffer a total meltdown. Eventually, with wails that sounded eerily like pleas for help, the thing began to retreat back the way it had come. It was pulled off the balcony by some invisible chain, slipping over the side and back down the spiral, clawing uselessly at the air as it sunk beyond sight. Kamek had gathered a bit of strength, and now he was crawling into the circle on his claws and knees, grabbing at fleeing wisps that melted through his fingers like mist.
No. You can't just turn back, not when we were so close.
He jabbed a single trembling claw at the princess, shrieking and begging the spirit to return.
She's right there. Can't you see her? So what if she's not in the circle? You can still reach her if you try. We can't let it end like this. I can't let it.
It was too late, and soon the retreating spirit's cries could no longer be heard. The little wizard knelt in the dust, amidst his fast-fading runes and candles extinguished by the wind. Slowly, painfully, he collapsed into himself and began to sob. It wasn't the funny, satisfying kind of crying to watch, either. These were the desperate tears of a wasted lifetime, of 1,000 losses endured, and of hopes dashed at the very end. It was such a pitiful sight that Bowser had to say something, even if this sniveling creature had just been his enemy.
You, realize that she was a complete nutcase, right? This is probably for the best.
That only made Kamek sob harder, sinking onto his side as he pounded a weak fist against the splintered pedestal.
I hate her so much,
he admitted, before glaring up at Bowser with enough venom to kill a Dino Rhino.
I could have been free from her forever, but you ruined everything.
There were suddenly a lot of questions to ask, but Kamek was spilling the answers with every shaking breath.
I swore that I would never leave her side, until I had found a way to fix her,
he began, struggling to swallow back the anger he had kept hidden for decades.
I stayed by her even as she lost her mind, even as she murdered my people, and took everything I loved in the name of fair payment.
The little wizard seemed to give up on keeping any secrets, because he kept right on going.
I used the ancients' magic to find your world, a perfect place where none of our hardships had ever happened. A place where I could be free of her, and she could be free from herself.
He sat up to stare into the sky, his hoarse voice falling to the shade of a whisper.
I set this all up, just for a chance to save the girl that Prince Bowser died for.
Here at the end, he was admitting things that he had likely never even said to himself.
But trying to save her was my biggest mistake of all. I wish I had never found her on Shooting Star Summit.
It sounded like such a cold thing, but maybe he was speaking of mercy.
I wish I had never taken her to that old house, or healed her wounds, or fed her wild mushrooms from the mountainside. Mushrooms don't grow on Shooting Star Summit,
Peach said offhandedly, speaking for the first time since the energy attack.
The soil is mainly stardust, so not much can live there. I've seen some scraggly weeds, but never fungi.
Kamek stared blankly at her, too tired to even be angry at the interruption.
You don't know what you're talking about,
he muttered, recalling the days he had spent foraging on that peak.
The morning after the battle, the mountainside was covered in them. Thousands of purple spotted toadstools, all over the wreckage. I fed her the plumpest, juiciest one I could find.
And then it was all so terribly clear. Images flashed through Bowser's mind of a battle long past, wraiths and shadows, and the worst bout of indigestion he had ever had.
Wait a second, what kind of purple spotted toadstools?
Back in the feast hall, nearly 100 stories down, the heroes were watching their previous nightmare play out in reverse. During the last few minutes, the general mood of the room had been one of tense confusion. None of the plans seemed to matter once the Empress had become a vicious cloud of death and flown away. Of all the bad endings Luigi had dreamt up during the span of this awful night, that certainly hadn't been one of them. But now, as he watched that same cloud descend upon him again, he was reminded again that things could always find a way to get worse. Mario and Vivian had been the first to see it coming, since they had been brainstorming ideas over by the windows. Luigi had been waiting, hiding, in the opposite corner, so he didn't see the entity until it was literally being forced back in through the ceiling. It soon became obvious that the cloud didn't want to be back here. It was struggling against itself, flailing and grasping at every surface to try and halt its downward spiral. The crimson core was in permanent overheat, and the noises from within bled together into one long, shrill scream. It was doomed to fall, deflating like a shapeless balloon back into the one vessel that would still accept it: the abandoned body of Empress Toadstool. But something else was happening, too, a frightful detail that went unnoticed until the very last few moments. The stormy mass wasn't just deflating, it was congealing, turning from smoke into slime as it slithered back home.
That's absolutely disgusting!"
Bao exclaimed, still a bit shaken up from her experience earlier.
"I don't need to see that stuff!" Wriggling back into her eye sockets.
Even the alternate version of Vivian seemed perturbed by the sight, submerging herself in the shadows as the grisly scene unfolded. But even when she wasn't visible, Luigi could still sense her flitting about beneath the stone, doing her part to prevent escape. The four heroes were truly trapped, forced to watch as the slime thickened and ebbed away into their enemy's shell. Then it was gone, and the stillness that fell seemed to last lifetimes. The Empress lay before them, so peaceful in rest that she might have been sleeping. Luigi wanted it to be over so badly, but things were never that easy. In a flash, the woman heaved herself upright, her good arm flailing for balance as her voice came back in frantic gasps.
"No. I can't. I can't go back to this. I left this body behind. If my invasion force sees what I am, then they'll..." "There's not going to be an invasion,"
Mario told her resolutely, stepping forward to test the soul barrier, and finding that it had fallen.
"You're right back where you started, and you've still got a lot to answer for in this world, Empress."
At last, there were no walls or tricks left for her to hide behind.
"You're still here, little ones? I'm afraid that my hospitality is running thin,"
the voice hissed, and that's when the situation started to tilt sideways. Luigi noticed it first: how the woman hadn't moved her mouth to match the words.
"I rebuilt this ship to escape this filthy world. I won't let you keep me trapped here, not after all my hard work."
She swayed her head from side to side, scanning the crowd with the glassy eyes of a corpse.
"Yeah, you're the only thing filthy about it,"
Vivian shot back, not even noticing when a faint shape twitched beneath the Empress' skin, sending ripples across her pale body.
"I haven't been here for very long, but I've seen plenty of beauty. How could you possibly hate it all so much? What could make you want to blame this whole world for your suffering?"
The voice within the Empress let out a bitter hiss, letting the body's head loll forward uselessly.
I thought I told you not to speak to me of suffering,
she reminded harshly, a sizzling edge to her tone that sounded a bit like burning leaves.
That's all I've ever known, since I was just a child. Just try to imagine the burdens I've had to bear. The helplessness of watching my planet die before my eyes, the responsibility of leading an empire with no hope, the guilt of leaving it all behind.
The body feebly lifted its puppet head, just enough for the party to gaze into the sightless eyes. Somehow, one was wet with fresh tears, while the other oozed thick with a sickening violet-black ichor.
But I never let the hardships break me, no matter how awful things got. I kept my head held high, like a ruler should, and my sights on the future. I believed that things would get better if I just kept trying.
The body's strength failed, and the head fell for the last time.
But that became a lie the day we found this world.
Suddenly, the unseen beast exploded into madness, writhing within the confines of its soft shell.
This planet took away everything I ever loved, and you have the gall to ask me why I hate it.
A great wet gash tore open in the midsection of the Empress dress, revealing the burning, furious iris of a single scarlet eye.
I hate it because of what it did to my fleet. Because of what IT did to my people. Because of what IT did to my daughters.
What happened next would likely go on to haunt Luigi's nightmares for the rest of his life. He could only really describe it. Like the sight of a great thorny squid tearing its way free from a water balloon. The creature's old prison exploded away in an instant as she unfurled her true self for the first time in 20 years. Hyphae lashed out in newfound freedom, testing their limits before coiling in to shield the ever-expanding mycelial monster at the chamber's heart. She grew in near-perfect silhouette, inflating her bizarre alien bladders as the world's light seemed to burn away in the depths of her hellfire eyes. Luigi crept back, step by terrified step, until his back met the wall, and there was nowhere left to go. Mario had taken an immediate defensive stance, shielding Vivian as the siren lit her fires for battle. Only Lady Bow, morbidly curious and unafraid of death, remained floating before the beast, waiting to ask the question that was surely on everyone's mind.
So, this is the real you, is it? If you're not Peach Toadstool, then what exactly are you? Don't you understand IT yet?
The fell thing said, spreading her hyphae out to showcase her full, unfathomable size.
I've been saying IT all along. I am the last survivor of the slaughter on Shooting Star Summit.
And so she roared, keening in grief for those she had lost, and perhaps even for herself, until the very planet trembled beneath the fury, the pain, and the all-consuming hatred of Empress Shroob. End of chapter.